Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Wiz Talk with Chase. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, and I'm joined by a very special guest. To my right, a beat reporter for the Washington Wizards for the Washington Post, Varun Shankar. Varun, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Hey man, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm glad you are able to join us here. While the 9-45 record doesn't exactly say there is a lot to talk about, there is a lot to talk about in terms of Wizards basketball and then how successful you've been just kind of early in your reporting and journalism career. So we're so excited to have you on, talk about all those things. Let's kind of go back to the very beginning. When did you even realize you wanted to do this? Be a sports reporter, cover a basketball team, cover sports in general, and what's kind of been your career path since? I know you're still young, so there hasn't been much, but what's kind of been your career path since the moment you realized this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's been over a decade, honestly, since I realized this because I was like 10 or 11 years old, and I'm reading what's the guy's name? John Feinstein's young adult series about these
Mhm.
two like young sports reporters, and it captivated me. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do, and haven't really switched since. So been lucky to get where I am.
Yeah, that's kind of with me. I happened to get into this right at that 10, 11-year-old range. That's right when COVID hit. So it was kind of like I had nothing to
Uh,
do. I think I was 9 at the time, and I went to these online sportscasting camps, and that kind of just helped me a little bit kind of get my feet going because
no
I've always
way.
loved sports, but that's kind of how I've been able to kind of get my track and kind of get started as well. But what most people don't realize, you just graduated college a year ago, and you're already a
Mhm.
significant beat reporter of a professional basketball team. Like, when I speak with people, they're always like, there's going to be such a challenge of getting a job after college, and you're going to have to climb up this ladder. How have you been able to, like, kind of as if you're like a fireman, just kind of climb up that ladder so quickly to the point where, again, you're an NBA beat reporter at what, 23 years old, 24 years old?
20 how old am I? 23. 23.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's not good that I have to think about it as long as I did but I mean, I'm just really grateful for the opportunities I've got, and some of it's luck, like, but there has been obviously a lot of hard work put into this. So I'm really grateful to be where I am, and I'm happy that the work is paying off.
Of course, kind of explain to the audience real quick before we break down a lot of the things involved in Wizards basketball. Just explain to the audience what exactly you do for the Washington Post on a game to game
Sure.
basis, the kind of coverage you make, how you cover the team, just so kind of people have a better understanding of what exactly you do.
Yeah, I'm around the team. I've been around the team for every single game so far this season, and I should be for most of the games this season. Um, I show up to the game, a couple hours before it starts. There's a pregame press conference with the coach. You get to talk to some of the players. You watch warmups. I write a story off every single game. Um, and then in between, I also write a bunch of other stuff regarding the team. I kind of have two goals as far as I approach the job. One is give people some explanation behind the why of what's happening. That's like the analysis part of the job.
Right.
That's both in terms of on court results, but also player development,
Yep.
transactions, obviously, and then
And I'm sure all
the
that's kind
other.
of important too when you have a 9-45 basketball team. The audience isn't coming there
100%.
expecting wins every time. So kind of finding that unique approach. Absolutely. Yeah.
Not only are they not coming there finding wins, they are like the games are like the least important thing, it feels, in a lot of the ways, because it's all about
Right.
the result of the game is like one of the least important things because it's kind of understood before the game even starts for a lot of these games.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and then the other goal is try and bring people behind the scenes as much as I can, both in terms of what influences decisions, but also like what's it like being around the team, like what's that vibe like. I know I have a lot more direct access to these players and staff than others do, and I try to make
Right.
sure I relay that knowledge.
Yeah, I cover Division 1 basketball for Fairfield University, and the one thing that I'm trying to do is like, because all of their games are important at this time of the year as you go toward March, a Division 1 basketball program. But at the same time, I also have like other stories that I want to get in. You mentioned how the
Mhm.
results of the games the Wizards play aren't as important, kind of in this rebuilding stage, and you see a 9-45 record. But just talk to me about how you kind of balance trying to get the quotes and the storylines for different stories you want to put together, but then also trying to like not completely ignore the results of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you try and plan ahead as much as possible. You got to have that future facing view, but also the current facing view as much as you can, and you try to balance that as much as possible. But I'm always just trying to gather stuff. You never know when something might be useful. One of the best feelings for me is when I'm writing a story and I'm able to go back to an interview from like a month ago and be like, I remember he talked about this, and so I can
All right.
integrate that kind of information.
Right. I'm sure being around the team every day too, you're just able to get so
It
much
helps so
information and
much. Yeah,
access to all.
there's just
Yeah.
like a mass that you get.
Do you attend the practices too, or like is that something you're incorporated in, or more during the games?
I often go to the practices and shoot arounds. I don't go to every single one, but I try to go as many as I can, depending on how my schedule aligns.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I mean, Bruno, I'm talking to you Sunday, February 16th. We're at the All-Star break, and we just saw a jam-packed NBA trade deadline, one of the craziest in history. I mean, we can talk
It
about this
feels
on a
that way.
separate note. I mean, Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, unbelievable. But then in terms of what the Wizards did, they made a handful of deals, and I think they were good, which included trading Jared Butler for a first-round pick, which is still shocking in my view, but kind of unbelievable in a sense because Butler's a fine player, but to get a first round pick out of him felt like Will Dawkins just rolled up the sleeves and went to work. The last episode I had on here, I said that this was the greatest trade deadline in Wizards history. They made a lot of moves, made a lot of headlines. What were your thoughts on the Wizards trade deadline where you got rid of guys like Valanciunas and Kuzma, but you were able to bring in some young players into draft capital?
Man, damning the Wizards with faint praise here because there's not a lot of good trade deadline memories. I can still remember, just kind of when they got Bogdanovich, this would have been in like 2017. That was a good move. I
Yeah.
like that one. Just
I mean,
going back.
they were always like their moves were evident at the deadline. Like they traded for Daniel Gafford the one year, they traded for
Yeah,
Porzingis the
that wasn't
other.
bad.
It felt like they were always like kind of in there on the headlines, but none of them like seemed to have been
Meant
as
anything.
impactful for the
Yeah.
team's goal as this deadline, in my view.
Yeah, like this year's deadline, like the way I put it is they didn't have any opportunities to hit home runs. Like the best asset they were trading is a depreciated Kyle Kuzma. But in every single deal, everything made sense and everything felt okay to me. I think you can quibble a little bit with the return they got on the Kuzma trade. I don't know. It really hinges on what you think of AJ Johnson, and I think that there is some upside there, but I don't know to what degree I
He's
like that.
raw. I mean, for me, I watch him like he's not polished, which is okay. The Wizards have
No,
time
he's
to
20.
find these
Yeah.
talents, but yeah, it's going to be a boomer bust type player in Johnson.
Yeah, yeah, and he just like there's like a level of physical mass he needs to put on, to be quite
Yeah,
honest, that you just need that. That needs to come first before you could really start doing a lot of the skill stuff, I feel. Or maybe not. Maybe those two can work in tandem. I don't know.
right.
But every single move they made sense. Again, you could quibble with should you have traded Kuzma last year, this year, blah blah blah. But you made the decision, and with that, as kind of in the past, they did decently well on every single move. Everything made sense. They got back good veterans. They freed up some contract flexibility in the next couple years. They got picks. They got Jared Butler into a situation where he could get a full-time contract with the 76ers. Like everything made sense. I liked it.
I did too, and I think what was interesting is like the Memphis trade kind of came out of nowhere. Like Johnny
Yeah.
Davis and Marvin Bagley weren't doing anything. The second round picks to me weren't that
Mhm.
impactful. I think the Wizards essentially they with the Grizzlies like, hey, we'll take on the salary, we'll take on the Marcus Smart salary, and he's going to make his debut after the All Star break. We'll take on Chris Middleton. They kind of took on some salaries, but they're like, you give us some picks, you give us some young talent, and we'll take on
Yep.
those salaries. And I think it's a smart move because Middleton's on the player option. Smart only 1 year left on his deal after this
Yep.
year, and he may get bought out. So I think it was smart for the Wizards to kind of take on those deals. But you kind of mentioned how like
I mean,
did the
sorry.
Wizards
What do you lose? What do you lose by taking on that money, right? Like, you don't need to spend that money right now. Like,
right,
you're not going to be hunting for an impact free agent six man. Like, why do you care, right?
right, exactly. And
Use
that
the
was
money
kind of
to
my
accumulate draft picks.
right, and that was kind of what I would love just so much as well about getting Jonas Valanciunas in the offseason, signing Sadiq Bey, who I know has still been
Yep.
hurt, but like getting some of these contracts, I'm like, you could afford to. Like the Wizards aren't near the first or second apron. Like they're not a
No,
really cap
I think they
expensive
got under the
team.
tax. If I'm correct, I think they got under the tax at this deadline.
Yeah, so it's like they can afford to pay some of these veterans. I mean, do you find that to be something the Wizards will continue to do? Like take on Valanciunas type contracts, Chris Middleton type contracts, and then just flip them or then get them off the books later? Does that something you think they'll continue to do?
I think they'll try and do it. I don't know, I think Valanciunas was a pretty easy. You signed him kind of with the understanding that sooner rather than later there was going to be a trade that sent him out.
Right.
That's like it's a classic rebuilding team strategy. I think they will do that, but they'll be very smart about how they do it. They're not gonna, they're going to be very intentional about like the types of characters they bring into a young locker room. I think they like having calming presences and like veteran influences. I think that having guys like Smart, having guys like Middleton, keeping a guy like Malcolm Brogdon is something that they really prioritized in that way. If they have the money, I do see them being somewhat active, but they have to be very careful about how they do it because they don't want to block opportunities for the young guys because like
Right.
even with a guy like Jonas could have started over Alex Sarr at points this year, especially earlier in the season,
Yeah.
just based on pure talent. But obviously, that doesn't work for a development-faced organization. You have to make sure that the veteran you're bringing in is going to be okay with, understands what you're doing essentially, and it, Valanciunas did. Everyone does. They come in with a pretty clear picture, but you got to make sure that everyone still understands that.
Right, and I think that was kind of the key thing as well, because you want to stockpile all these draft picks. So you're not going to nail every pick. The picks that you think you have nailed and the guys you already have on your roster, you want to make sure that their development is not
Yeah.
being impacted at all by
Mhm.
making these moves. I think that's kind of an underlying element of this that not a lot of people do talk about. We talked about the when to trade. You're talking about when to trade Kuzma, and did the Wizards trade him at the right time? I honestly want to give a lot of credit to Will Dawkins and Michael Winger for stepping in here and making that impact, because Dawkins watched Sam Presti's masterclass with the Oklahoma City Thunder, going from that kind of contending stage and then rebuilding them, and now you look at where they are now. Dawkins kind of comes from that organization and watches how that happened, but he also came to DC. And he was left with trading Bradley Beal 3 years later than he should have, 2 years later than he should have. Porzingis probably 2 years later than he should have. I feel like what's so impressive about how the Wizards are doing this and how they're compiling all these picks is Dawkins didn't have the luxury like the Thunder had when they were rebuilding of trading two MVP candidates in the middle of their prime. And so I think when you see deals where we're able to trade away Jared Butler, Johnny Davis, and Marvin Bagley in 2 of those deals and get 2 first-round picks, I think there has to be an element there of how critical that is and how great Will Dawkins is doing, stockpiling picks despite not having that top-level talent.
It was a good deadline. I think I might not go as far as you are in the praise, but I think it was a very well thought out, well executed deadline. But nothing they've done here is really going to decide in one way or another. The rebuild, the process is sound, and that's important as we try to evaluate things further down the line. But these are moves around the margins, largely considered. So at the end of the day, it's going to matter. It's their draft pick. Their next 2 draft picks are going to matter, or I should say their next 2 drafts, because they have 18 picks in each draft, it feels like.
Right.
Their next 2 drafts are going to really make or break this rebuild.
What did you not exactly love about the deadline? Was it kind of the little value for Kuzma, or what was kind of the element of that you were kind of disappointed in a sense?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say disappointed. I just think they did the best they could with what they had to work with. They just didn't have a lot to work with.
Right.
It was it was a very shrewd, professional, put together deadline. I just don't think they didn't fleece another team. Every deal they got, it was pretty fair value for both sides. Does that make sense?
Right.
I don't think they
100%.
unequivocally won a deal by 125% or 200%.
Right.
Everything was a marginal win, which is good. You need marginal wins, but this is and when you're a rebuilding team, you need to take nibbles around the edges because you never know what something might turn into down the line. But at the end of the day, most likely it's still going to be a nibble, and they will not be evaluated based on the success of the Jonas Valanciunas trade. They will be evaluated on the success of their next 2 draft picks, which is the most important thing, and the development of the young players right now. I also did we don't know what that offer from Dallas for Kuzma was 2 years ago. But I do think that there was probably a slight. I would not be surprised if the Wizards, and this is mostly speculation on my part, I would not be surprised if the offer the Wizards got this year were less valuable than what they could have gotten last year. But I'm not 100% sure about that. We don't know what that offer is. So.
Right. It's all the hypotheticals were so tough in terms of basketball, but it did feel like they traded Kuzma when they finally had to, and not when they could have.
And at his lowest value, right? Just
right.
He's been playing, which
and it was one of
you
those
can't
things.
Control. You can't predict that if you're Will Dawkins, right? But maybe you should have had some level of foresight to say, okay, we're going to be trying to empower these young guys a lot more next year. But maybe you didn't know that you're going to make 3 first-round picks at that time, right? You didn't have
right.
You only got the 3rd one in the Denny deal over the offseason, but maybe you should have had a little more foresight to say, hey, we're going to be changing this guy's role. It's going to be a different situation. Is there a potential that we could be trading him? Should we sell high on him, essentially?
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know that it's entirely fair to ding the Wizards for not anticipating that Kuzma would fall off the way he had this season. And I don't know to what degree teams evaluated that, but that's the one thing where I do think I squint a little bit more at that move and the
Yeah.
process behind that move.
And I think what was upsetting too in the whole Kuzma situation was when he made that one comment after a press conference. He's like, "I'm not here for the development of these young guys." I think that was kind of the moment where all Wizards fans and reporters and the staff kind of looked
Yeah,
themselves in the eye and they're like, "All right, it's time." Because you look at the numbers. I mean, I talked about this on my last episode. Bilal Coulibaly, I mean, the difference between the way he plays with Kuzma and without Kuzma, it's like two completely different players. His usage, his scoring, everything. Same with Keyshawn George as well. I just think we were talking about how you don't want to ruin or hinge
sure.
development or any of these young players. And I think Kuzma was doing that. And I think that's part of the reason why he did have to go at this time.
I don't know that I I don't know. It's tough to say. I think those comments in Phoenix sounded a lot worse than Kuzma intended them to.
Right.
I don't think he was saying it quite as bluntly as like he actually said it. I think like the comments were not misinterpreted, but I don't think that internally within the Wizards those comments were an issue. Like I had a person with knowledge with those discussions kind of tell me that those comments did not factor into the trade. And also I see a lot of the stuff about like, yeah, Bilal's so much better with Keyshawn without or with Kuz without Kuz. And there's probably something there just in terms of the opportunities game, but like some of that is on Bilal. Like Bilal needs to be more aggressive and create his shots. Like and for
Right.
rookies, scoring is so difficult. Scoring is one of the most difficult things to do in the NBA, obviously, and it's a premium thing. And ideally, Kuzma, if he was playing at the level he had been over the last couple seasons, would be able to lighten the load on these young players because like these young players are. I don't want to say worn down, but the length of the season takes a toll on these guys. And having some nights where you only have to take 3, 4 shots, as frustrating as it might be to see from the outside, might be good for the player just because they're getting a little like not a day off necessarily, but not a day where it's a heavy load. And we're going to see that for the rest of the season. Like all these rookies are going to be taxed, and I am kind of curious to see how they start dealing with that.
It is kind of an interesting point to bring up. We're going to break down the young core. I just want to say though, I mean, Chris Middleton, Marcus Smart, Rashawn Holmes, Malcolm Brogdon, there still are
Mhm.
veterans on this roster who are going to get playing time. What do you see their role being in this next year or two before maybe they move on to their next path?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I think with Middleton, I think Middleton will probably start. I don't know for sure. Just for, playing it out in my head. If you go Poole, Bilal, Middleton, Keyshawn, and Alex, and then
Right.
Bub comes off the bench with him and Brogdon as like your top two guards. Now you got a question of what do you do with Marcus Smart? Like, there's a lot of guys that they now need to find a way to get minutes for, which I'm curious to see how Brian Keefe balances that.
Maybe you run a small ball like Sar takes up the paint now that you don't have Valanciunas.
Yeah,
It'll be
yeah.
interesting. Sure.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that shakes out. Like, what is AJ Johnson's role in this for the rest of the season? Like,
Yeah.
they've played these first few rookies so much, and that was intentional. They think the in-game reps are so valuable, but can you do that with Johnson just because he's a little less physically developed than the other rookies? Something to think about. I don't know. We'll see how they handle it. Similar note: what happens with Tristan Vucevic? Is he gonna get the backup center role? Is Rashawn gonna get the backup center role behind Sar? Are they gonna do both of them? Are they gonna play them together? Maybe we saw 3 centers play in the last game before the break, but Tristan played like 3 minutes. So
They had to get they had to get Bagley out of there for sure just to clean that area up. I mean, Bagley hardly
yeah,
played.
I mean, listen with Bagley and Johnny Davis, like those are expiring contracts. Like you're putting them in deals to make the money match. To be quite honest, like that's
Right.
the main reason. So whether Bagley was there or not, I don't think he would have seen 20 minutes for the rest of the season.
Right. Let's talk about this young core. We're talking about how they're kind of putting a lot of trust or playing them a ton of minutes, trying to help them develop. But it kind of is. I remember I was credentialed for the Wizards December 28th, overtime loss to the Knicks. And that was one of those games where I feel like you really learned a lot about this young core. Jordan Poole was out, Kyle Kuzma was out. So it was kind of just this young core trying to make things happen. And it felt like Bilal Coulibaly was the player who was being asked to get those shots late. And he didn't make them. That's why the Knicks ended up prevailing. He had a great game. He just wasn't making those shots down the stretch. You're around this team. who is kind of considered, maybe they've said it, maybe they haven't, who's kind of considered the leader and the face of the franchise? Or is there really not one yet? And maybe it's a Cooper Flag or someone that they pick up over these next 2 drafts when they have multiple first-round picks.
I think that if you're looking purely on the court production-wise, I don't think any of them have shown me yet that, oh, this is someone you like a number 1 or a number 2 on a title team. I don't think there's anyone here who reaches. I mean, like think about the last few title teams, like who the number 2 guy was, just as like the threshold that we're talking about. With the Celtics, it's Jaylen Brown. With the Nuggets, it was Jamal Murray. It was obviously like Steph and KD is a different situation. Was it the Celtics who won the? Yeah, the Celtics won the title last. Like even this year, like the best teams, the second guy on the Thunder is a Jalen Williams or a Chet type, right? Who else? Who else stands out? What are other good teams? On Cleveland, it's maybe Garland or Mobley or Mitchell, like one of those 3, whoever you like is like the top, right? No one has shown me right now that they are going to get to that level for the Wizards. I think that person is probably, if they do get that player, one of those players could develop into that kind of player, but that requires some level of jump that we have yet to see. So I am curious to see how that progresses for the Wizards. Cooper Flag, AJ DiBasanta, I think I've said that right. One of those names could obviously be coming to DC depending on how the lottery odds come out, and so that future centerpiece might be not on the roster yet. In fact, I would say right now, is likely not on the roster yet.
Interesting. Because I feel like a lot of people were like, this is it. But I'm like, there's also going to be more drafts to come. Like, this is not the end of the Wizards trying to compile these stars and compiling young talent. I do want to kind of talk to you about this young core, though. Like, you can't keep everyone at the end of the day. Not everyone's going to pan out. Not everyone can get paid at the end of the day. Which of these guys do you see as long-term pieces on this Wizard squad, based on what you've seen, based on the way that they're just acting behind the scenes? Just who are the people that you think are really going to be here for a substantial amount of time and that are really going to pan out compared to the others?
It's tough to say. I think all of that. The reason it's tough is because I said the thing about none of them look like they're going to be stars right now. On the flip side, all of them look like they're going to be productive NBA players for a good chunk of time. Like I think every player here is going to get a second contract, either with the Wizards or another team, and it's going to be like a pretty sizable contract. Everyone here is a useful NBA player, right? And so it's hard to say, like, could they keep all 4 of them? Yeah, but if a good offer comes along a couple of years from now in a trade situation, could you see 1 or 2 of them get traded? Maybe. Right. I don't know. And the Wizards don't know yet. It depends on what happens in the next few years. I don't think they've made those kinds of decisions. They're still learning about these players, both in terms of what they can do, but also what their long-term potentials might be. So it's a feeling out process still.
Let's talk about Jordan Poole. He's kind of the one person who I feel like doesn't fit any timeline because he's not like a Kuzma or a Valanciunas that doesn't fit entirely, but he's also not a part of like that core 4 or the people that you see as long-term outlets. I mean, we see some games where he's dropping 40 plus and he's the best player on the court on no matter who's playing. And then there are other games where he has a dud and he's in single digits. And it feels like it's unpredictable of what's going to happen. It feels like you'll see in the first quarter whether Jordan Poole is going to have a great day or a lousy day. What's his future in DC? Because I feel like he's got a large contract, not great defensively, probably won't be in his prime by the time this rebuild's all said and done. Just what is the timetable for Jordan Poole's future?
So with Poole, some of like when he has a tough game, I think a lot of that is honestly they are opposing defenses put so much attention on him. They are like he talks about it, like he'll be like, man, they are swinging the paint over so much, and they're just like they're forcing the ball out of his hands a lot of time. Because would you rather have Jordan Poole, who's like proven himself as a scorer, or would you rather have cool ball, who's still trying to express like get to that level, or Keyshawn George taking those shots? You want to get the ball out of Jordan's hands and make these other guys make plays. Right. I think the Wizards really like him. I think he's a good voice in the locker room for the young guys. He really makes a habit and has like an intentional focus on doing that, which I think has been really good. We'll see what he is long term, though. I am also very curious to see what they do with him. So you talked about the contract. He's making his spot track will load.
It's got to be, I think, 28, 30. It's got to be upwards of that, right? Like
might be even more than that. All right. Why does this hate? Come on. One time I need the good Wi-Fi. All right, whatever. He's got like a few more years left on his
I
contract.
said, so right here, 29,
Perfect.
31, 34. Yeah.
Yeah. So 3 more years. So 2 years after this one. Is that right?
2 years after this, correct? Yeah.
If you're the Wizards, you're likely not like really competing for titles in that time. The first year, you can really see the Wizards like trying to power out of a rebuild, depending on who they have. And again, it depends on who they have and what these young guys turn into. Like if Alex Sarr turns into an Evan Mobley level player next year, we're talking about a different situation. But you're gonna want until that Knicks pick that you have. I think it's like top 8 protected next year. You want to keep your pick next year, and then after that, you can really start to try and compete. And at that point, you also lose the salaries for Middleton and Smart. After that, you have 1 more year with Poole, and I think the Wizards would be more than amenable to re-signing Jordan Poole when he's 28 to maybe a more modest contract for him to be a 6-man scorer type role off the bench. We'll see. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's in an ideal world. I think that they would see a situation where, okay, we pick up our long-term centerpiece sometime in the next couple of years. We are about to start our competitive cycle. Jordan comes off the books. We re-sign him to a more agreeable number, and he's now your spark plug off the bench, or your third best player, which is, I think, a pretty reasonable role for Jordan Poole to be in.
I think it is as well. And again, it's kind of so hard to determine. I think that we think of Jordan Poole as older than he is. What is he, 25, 26 years old
He's
at this time?
25, right? At the
It's
end of this contract, he's going to be 28. Like, you don't need to be in a rush to trade him. He hasn't, if you're considering like the start of a player's prime, like 26, 27, he's just getting there.
I mean,
and he plays a premium position. He has a premium skill as a scorer. I don't know. Yeah. I don't see any reason to trade him.
For me, I mean, I was speaking with Marco Gacchino, who's a writer for the Washington Wizards for a writing company. And what he was telling me is he's like, I think that we rush the development of a lot of these players. Like when we talk about kind of those core four, they're what, 19, 20, 21 years old. Maybe I think Keyshawn's 21. So like, theoretically, I'm not saying this is going to be the case, but they don't need to be playing their best basketball until they're 27, based on the way that we usually think of these players when they're in their prime. So I think just us as NBA fans and reporters, we kind of rush the development. Not everyone's going to be like Luka Doncic all NBA year 2.
Yeah.
And they get traded at 25 years old in the middle of his prime. I won't go there, but
year three is when I start to say, like, you got to start seeing some big steps. Like next year is going to be really important for Bilal. I think that you need to start seeing big steps because, hey, man, you got to start making extension decisions at that point, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah,
you got to start picking up options and giving out, contracts. So you really want people to show you something by year 3, I think, because then around that time, you're usually like 23, 24. You've had a couple years in an NBA weight room. You're physically developed. You have gotten, like, you are more adjusted to the physical demands of an NBA schedule. You are a professional at that point in time. You are still early in your career, but you are now at a point where you need to start taking a step. And so that's the year, the 3rd and 4th year is really where I start to, all right, what do we got here? Because what you are then, I'm willing to say you're pretty close to what you're going to be.
Right. Multiple 16 games losing streaks this year for the Washington Wizards, but then we just recently saw a 3-game winning streak, which was huge for the city, for this fan base. I think everyone needed that. And then you saw an OT loss to the Pacers, where they played a really, really competitive basketball game. Kind of this stretch, it feels like the Wizards are playing better basketball than they were when they were just getting blown out in kind of that 16-game losing stretch in January. Talk to me about kind of when this team is winning and when they're gelling and they're playing competitive basketball. While we're talking about the results, don't really mean much in the long term. In kind of the short term, what does it do for the team's confidence, for the players' confidence, to see that their hard work is quote unquote paying off?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they try to be professionals regardless of what the final score looks like. I think that's easier said than done, obviously. I think it helps. It's just for morale reasons. I think it probably helps. It's also, more importantly than the wins and losses themselves, it is how they play in those games. Are you seeing, or are they winning because Keyshawn George? Them winning because Rashawn Holmes had an unexpected 25-point game, or Jordan Poole scores 50-something, right? Like, that's one thing. And those are still, I think, have some value. But them winning because Keyshawn George was really good on defense, them winning because Bilal Coulibaly got to the rim at a good rate, them winning because Bub Carrington is making good plays and looking efficient with the basketball, that's the good stuff. And that's what you're starting to see of late. That's what's exciting.
It is. And I think that's what's so much fun. Like when they beat the Brooklyn Nets and Bilal had a triple-double, like you could see this team loves each other. And I think that Do you think Keith's the answer? And I know we're going to wrap this up soon, but I mean, what are your thoughts on Keith and him long term? Because I think he really does. Yeah, I think he loves the players. I think the players like him, but how long are you going to stick around with them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, on the point of like the team liking each other, I think there is a really good camaraderie on the team, generally speaking, but also among the young guys in particular. I do think that the three rookies and Bilal are friends, which is nice to see. With Keith, I think he's done a good job of keeping everyone's morale at a certain point. I think that's like getting people to come to work and work really hard and put their all and go through training and practice and
Right.
treatment and eating right and going through the toils and the responsibilities of being an NBA player and being a professional while you're getting bludgeoned night after night is difficult. It's so hard.
Yeah.
But he's trying. He's keeping. I'm pretty sure. Like I don't know this for sure. Obviously, some of this happens behind the scenes. But it seems like he has kept his players holding up their end of the bargain.
Varun, this has been awesome. It's really been great to have you here today. We've really touched on a lot of great things with the Washington Wizards. We're going to wrap it up here. We really appreciate all the great things you've said on here and a lot of interesting analysis that not a lot of people can get unless you're credentialed and with the team every single day. So we really appreciate you joining us today. I'm sure a lot
I
of
really
people would love
appreciate
to
having me.
be
The
in
kind
your
words.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would love to be in your position, a beat reporter covering an NBA team, going to the practices. That's like a dream job for a lot of people, including myself. So if you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring journalist or reporter like myself sitting here today, what would that be and why?
Figure out if you really want this because it is a wonderful life in a lot of ways. It's also really difficult in a lot of ways. It is very demanding of your time. There is not a lot of work-life balance. And like we talked about earlier, like opportunities aren't exactly flowing freely in this industry, right? But if you and so I tell people like just make sure you want to do this because if you do want to do this and you can make it happen, it's a great job. It's an incredible job. It's so great. But the path getting here is not easy. And so if you feel like a calling to this, if you feel like you have to do this, which is the way I felt like I couldn't really do anything else for right now. Um, go ahead and pursue it full speed because if you can make it work, you can really, really enjoy this thing.
Varun, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thank you so much.
We're going to wrap it up here, folks. That was Varun Shankar to my right talking about the Washington Wizards. Please check out his work on the Washington Post. The links to all of his social media and how you can find his work will be in the description. Varun, thanks again. We're going to wrap it up here. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Wiz Talk with Chase. As always, go Wizards.